Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about Myers-Briggs personality tests and sharing our specific personality tests and if we feel like it is accurate or not so accurate. So let's start off by sharing a little about and the differences first for those who are not familiar with Myers-Briggs. I'll just give a quick rundown based on the descriptions off Truity.com. So there's 4 letter types basically, or 4 positions of letters. I'm going to butcher this, but I'll try to give a quick summary. And let's see. Myers and Briggs describes individual differences in terms of 4 personality dichotomies. Each dichotomy consists of 2 distinct and opposing styles. For instance, like the first one is E versus I, which is for extroverted versus introverted. The second one is S versus I for sensing versus intuition. The sensing people focus on their 5 senses and are interested in informing that they can directly see, hear, feel, and so on. They tend to be hands-on learners and often described as practical. I'm like, oh, I feel like that sometimes. But the intuitives, the I focus more on abstract level of thinking. They're more interested in theories, patterns, and explanations. Although that does sound like me too. They're described as creative. And then the third letter is T versus F for thinking versus feeling. The thinkers tend to make decisions with their head. They're interested in finding the most logical, reasonable choice. That's totally my husband. And the feelers tend to make decisions with their hearts. That's me. They are interested in how a decision will affect people and whether it fits in with their values. And then the final letter, the J versus P, stands for judging versus perceiving, whereas the judges appreciate structure and order. They like things planned and dislike last-minute changes, versus the perceivers appreciate flexibility and spontaneity. They like to leave things open so they can change their minds. So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts around the Myers-Briggs personality test?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of different things that I could touch on, but on the surface of it, I'm going to start at my more generic version of just like how I think about personality tests, because like Myers-Briggs and pretty much every personality test has a little bit of pushback from people about like reliability and validity and stuff like that. So the way that I tend to find thinking about these things useful is as a reflection tool, not necessarily as a tool to like categorize you exactly. And like I think one of the big gaps that people fall into with Myers-Briggs, for example, is looking at sort of these dichotomies and thinking like introversion, extroversion. Oh, I'm either one or the other. And some of the tests do this, but others don't. I think again, it's more useful to look at it sort of on a scale, right? Like if you can get a percent, because for certain attributes, for example, like I'm on the introverted side, but I'm not. I'm probably closer to an ambivert than introverted, right? Like, it's like 1 or 2 notches. Whereas for some people, they're like cranked clear over there. Right. So, just sort of at a high level, I think it's like important to set sort of framing around some of this stuff, because I think people come in with just sort of a mindset of like, okay, cool, this test is going to give me the category that I fall into, the binary like switch of like, I am this or I am that. And obviously things are a little bit more nuanced. And I think that's where a lot of people end up pushing back too. Right. Like, oh, there's so much more nuance. But I do think it is useful to use as sort of like a reflection tool.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that in that, everyone kind of occurs on a spectrum. It's not like black or white. It's like maybe they're more on one side of the spectrum than the other, but it's rare. I mean, there are definitely people that exist on the extreme sides of each spectrum, but I think most people kind of fall in the middle and maybe just lean on more one side than the other. And that's kind of how the test works. If I recall, the last time I took it, I think it's like they share something like about a personality quality that a person might have, and you write like agree, strongly agree, neutral, strongly disagree, or disagree, essentially are your options. So I was always thinking perhaps if someone, depending on their mood, that could change from like, or over as they age, maybe their personality changes. I know that has happened for people. For myself, though, I've been pretty stable and stagnant, even though I've done it at various points in my life. I've stayed, the personality type that I am is the ENFJ. And I agree. I'm like, I don't think I'm like extroverted like my husband extroverted, but I guess I always lean on that side. But I have the introverted quality sometimes. I definitely need my alone time. I need to like decompress. I prefer smaller gatherings versus like giant parties. So, I mean, I think I'm not like extremely on the extroverted side, but maybe slightly over the like mid range, like the middle of the spectrum level. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just a much more useful way to sort of look at these things. And I've also run into people who have felt sort of boxed in by the categories, which is interesting. Like they think that the test is predictive in some way, right? As opposed to just like sort of reflective.
Mhm.
And again, it's just like, you know, coming in with more attuned mindsets is really helpful for getting value out of something like this. And then again, like you were saying, like you've retested and sort of had the same results, but other people have retested and gotten things that are like fairly different. And it gets hard when you have certain traits that are close to the middle, right? Where, like you were saying, you feel a little bit different, and then you answer a couple questions differently, and you switch from introversion to extroversion. Well, the profile that is given for those when you change is drastically different. So I think that's another reason that a lot of people have like concerns or skepticism about it being predictive. And I just don't think that's like a good, it's not a useful way to look at it. It's something that's very much up for debate. And I think there's a way more valuable path to take in just using it as a reflection tool.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And, you know, although, I mean, I don't remember the first time I took this test. I guess maybe my 20s. I feel like if I tested as a child, though, I might have ended up introverted because my parents always described me as a child. And I feel like I've become a trained extrovert. I don't think I was like born this way. And so, I mean, it feels natural now to this extent, but I think it took, you know, being a waitress for one, taking dance and having to meet a lot of people, I think were two factors that kind of influenced my personality in becoming more extroverted. So, but I'm curious, let's talk about your personality type. You have yet to share. What is your type and how would you describe that, I guess?
Yeah, mine is INTJ.
Hmm.
I don't know if I super specifically remember exactly what that combination of characteristics means. I remember that it's like fairly uncommon. Let's see, imaginative and strategic thinkers with a plan for everything. I'm not
You're
gonna
the
read this whole
architect.
thing, but
The INTJ is what you are, right?
yep.
Okay.
And at least one thing that resonates for
Mhm.
me, and I don't know if it's from this profile or just
Yeah.
in general, but like the thinking versus feeling
Mhm.
dichotomy.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I haven't taken it in a long time, but I feel like I'm very far on the thinking side of things.
Mhm.
And that at least is one piece that when I took this and was able to like reflect on it and stuff was useful to recognize that some people are more likely to make decisions based on their feelings as opposed to their thoughts, because
Mhm.
you know, we both know that feelings influence your thoughts and decisions, like
Oh, totally.
regardless of who you are. but sort of the weight that they have
Mhm.
is that was something that was interesting for me to sort of recognize, way back whenever I took this for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that being something that would have you kind of ponder that, because I feel like that feelings influence people's thinking all the time. And I feel like a lot of people are not quite aware of it. But at the same time, when I compare, I think my husband's definitely a thinker and I'm a feeler, and it's very apparent of our difference. There's no question about that. But I think sometimes it's hard to tease out, definitely. So I was just reading what the 16personalities.com says about the intj, and it does say it's one of the rarest personality types and one of the most capable. Architects know this all too well. Rational and quick-witted. I'd agree with that. They pride themselves on their ability to think for themselves, not to mention their uncanny knack for seeing right through phoniness and hypocrisy. But because their minds are never at rest, architects may struggle to find people who can keep up with their nonstop analysis of everything around them. Interesting. I feel like I can keep up with your nonstop analysis. It's what we do on our podcast. It's just analyze a lot of stuff.
It's because you only have to deal with it for an hour a week. I think
that's
the...
that good point. Good point. Yeah.
No, and I feel like, again, just going back to like the way that I've sort of thought about or used these things in the past, like reading certain descriptions like that piece seems to fit or resonate for me. But I also recall having read through this is just one page. There's tons of other pages and articles and long stuff that you can read and all sorts of crap. And there was a time when I was actually like, it's been long enough that I forgot most of it, but I was actually trying to determine the value of this tool as just like, how can you use it for people and what does it do and what's it good for? And it's just interesting because like, you go to enough different websites or to enough different sources or whatever else and read through every single thing. And, I think there is some validity to it in the sense of there is something that this test is sort of like hitting on, but then there's definitely like pieces that don't hit as well. And it's not like as unreliable as like astrology, for example, where you can go read anything for any sign and just be like, yeah, I am gonna have good luck today. Like, there's something a little bit more to it than that, but there is definitely still, again, it's not like 100%. Like if you go through and read through your profile, you're not going to be like, wow, every single thing perfectly fits me. Or if it does, that just happened to be by chance. And if you keep looking at enough of them, you will find pieces that don't. Again, that's why I think it's useful to just have like this idea in mind to use it as like a reflection tool, because it can also help you get insights, when it does match up, insights into sort of the way that you're acting or like how other people might see you or situations where you may be most attuned to like perform and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Agree. I actually looked up that I agree a little more has more validity than astrology, because I feel like they use a lot of qualities that could apply to everyone. Like, oh yeah, you're a warm, good person. I'm like, everyone wants to believe that about themselves, so it's like, yeah. But I did do the personality test before, I guess, or no, I think when my husband and I were kind of deciding if it would like make sense to have this be a long-term thing. I mean, this wasn't the deciding factor. If we align up in our personality test, then this can work. It was more of using it as a tool to be like, okay, how our personalities are different. We definitely have very different personalities, but there's some qualities that are the same and some that are different. How do we interact with those differences and move forward in a productive manner? Not like that this is a make or break. Ooh, you're a whatever personality type, this can never work. I mean, I think I don't know of any personality type that just I can't have a good relationship with potentially, or at least like friendship with, not that I'm aware of. But just since I read your description off of 16personalities.com, I'm going to read mine just because it's been a little while since I've read it. And I'm like, how much does this resonate with me? They say protagonists, which is the ENFJ, feel called to serve a greater purpose in life. Thoughtful and idealistic, these personalities types strive to have a positive impact on other people and the world around them. They rarely shy away from opportunity to do the right thing, even when doing so is far from easy. They are natural born leaders, which explains why these personalities can be found among most notable politicians, coaches, and teachers. Their passion and charisma allows them to inspire others, not just in their careers, but in every arena of their life, including their relationships. Few things bring protagonists a deeper sense of joy and fulfillment than guiding friends and loved ones to grow into their best selves. Well, I think that's actually accurate. I read that. So other ENFJs would include Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey, which I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. But I do pretty much agree with everything here. And I think this is a little more specific than like, oh, you're just a friendly person that likes people kind of a thing. So I resonate with this a lot for myself. And I remember when I was looking up my personality and comparing it with my husband's, particularly it was important for us to see the differences because we were planning to have kids. It's like, how are parenting styles going to be different? And how are we going to get on the same page so we're not like conflicting with how we discipline our kids or how we raise our kids in a way? I think that's where something like this could be a helpful tool.
Yeah, that brings up a really good topic because I've mostly been talking about using these as a tool to understand yourself, but to use them with someone else to help understand them a little bit better. I mean, the pitfalls are sort of the same, which is like, if you know someone's letters, you don't really know that much about them. And like, you should still go through and sort of see what things they feel like fit and don't. Because I've seen that. I've seen like, you know, people use this kind of stuff for like jobs, right? People will be like, oh, like take the Myers-Briggs and then we'll see if you can do this job or not. And I like, that's not a good application of this at all.
Yeah.
And in the same way, like, you know, if you're using it in your relationship, like you should definitely go through the results of whatever the test is and talk with the person to see if it seems like it fits. Because I've seen people do this test or, you know, similar tests and be like, oh, so you're this kind of person. And the other person be like, I don't really think so. Like that doesn't resonate very well with me. And then it's sort of, not in a romantic relationship, is not the sense I saw, but just other relationships. And then it like sort of shaped the relationship, but in the wrong way, because they were going off of the test again, thinking like, oh, I know who this other person is now. This has predictive power, instead of like, oh, cool, we can kind of walk through this together and then I can learn more about them.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a way to kind of learn more about them. And, you know, it's not like this is definitive or anything. It's just kind of, oh, maybe like, I mean, usually I think most people can tell. It might be a little harder. I think once you start dating someone and you get to know them, you probably may be able to guess each of these four letters potentially. Like based on these, I could definitely have guessed 2 of the 4 letters for my husband. It's like super obvious that he's extroverted, like well beyond me for being extroverted. And then he is definitely a thinker. So I'm guessing I could have guessed out 2 of those. And then when we were looking at the different like profiles, like the strengths and weaknesses, he wasn't aligned with all of them. He didn't agree. But at the same time, from my perspective, I was like, I don't know. I think that's kind of so it does require a little like self-reflection. And it might be interesting to hear, you know, talking to friends and family that know you well, to get some perspective from them to see if like, do you think I'm like this? What are your thoughts? about that, because sometimes it's hard to like self-reflect and see when you maybe don't internally agree, but how you internally see yourself can be different how you're perceived by others. So
Yeah, that's probably the most valuable way to use stuff like this. Like if you can use it as sort of a, because sometimes it's hard, especially if you haven't thought about it or done it, like to just solicit feedback directly from the people around you and get a better understanding of the way that you sort of like exhibit yourself. But if you have something like this is a really great structured way to be able to start like getting some of that understanding of how other people perceive you and those sorts of things. But again, it just reminded me in one of the pieces that, like, you know, you have to do all with a grain of salt, because in mine is so pessimistic about like the capacity for my ability to have like successful relationships. Like so pessimistic. It's like, oh, you're basically doomed. Like you're never gonna figure out love. You're never gonna have a good relationship. And it's just like, you know, those more negative things like can cause a lot of problems if you're not looking at it correctly. And I know before I got a more structured, like useful view of these kinds of tests, I used to have rolling around in my head, like, because this was before I was in like a successful long-term relationship, that I was just like, oh God, like, is this true? Like, is it that I can't do this? Like, I'm incapable of doing this. And it wasn't something that I like believed super strongly, because I was like sort of developing my understanding of these like sorts of tests and stuff, but it was something that was rolling around in the back of my head. And even worse is it was something that like maybe a handful of times I actually deferred to, which is to say that like when things weren't going well in a particular relationship, I'd be like, maybe it's just my personality, like maybe I just can't like connect with people in this way. And it's just not true. Like looking back now, it's just not true. I did need some a few more skills and mindsets to successfully navigate a relationship, and also maybe part of that was like finding the right person too. But like you know, this piece of it, of the test, like the result is just not accurate.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, you know, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. And it's like, even if you're more prone to have certain weaknesses compared to other personalities, let's say it's relationships, it's like everyone has the ability to improve on those weaknesses if they're willing to commit to taking the actions to better themselves in that area. So I agree, it doesn't doom you to fail at relationships for the rest of your life. But it's just like, oh, okay, this is another self-reflective thing. Like, yeah, maybe this is a weakness of mine. Maybe this isn't. I don't know. But maybe it's somewhere to kind of look and see if I can better myself in this area. But actually, funny thing, I was about to look up like strengths and weaknesses of our different personalities. And I saw that like for your personality type, the architect, Michelle Obama is your same type. And I was like, oh, that's funny, because I got Barack Obama, you got Michelle Obama, and they're like a power couple, and we're like a power podcasters, I guess, in a way. Because the other thing I wanted to bring up, though, before we go into more specific strengths and weaknesses, is that like I don't think I would want to be with someone the exact same personality type as me. I don't think that would be, I mean, I could probably make it work, but you know, some of the weaknesses of the protagonist, which I'm like, yeah, if I really like do a hard look at myself, I could see that I might have some of these. I think I maybe improved, like some of the weaknesses they list are unrealistic, overly idealistic. I could definitely do that. Condescending, intense, overly empathetic. And, you know, so to some degree, I can really identify with probably all of those at some point in my life, sometimes more than others. But I think that's where like my weakness, and that's where my husband, who's the thinker versus the feeler, and I'm the N, I don't think he's an N, I forget, but generally the point I'm trying to get across is that I've been the one to have more like my head in the clouds and dream big and like the world is full of possibilities, and he's the one to be more like grounded and realistic. And I think in a way that balances out, because it's like, yeah, no, it's great to dream, but we also have to be like practical. He's very logical and practical. So I think we kind of help each other in that way and balance each other out. So I think that is the difference that actually benefits. Sometimes there's conflict. I will admit there's definitely conflict with that too, but for the most part, I think it's beneficial for me to have someone that's a little more grounding.
Yeah, I think that's again, it matches into this test, but it's also just a more generically true thing, which is like having people around you, not just your partner, but also your partner, people around you that can like complement your weaknesses or have strengths that you don't, is really useful. Like there's some things that you want to probably overlap on, like values, like that is generally pretty helpful, but actual skills and strengths and things that lend themselves to your personality, it's definitely useful to have people around you who can shore up some of those weaknesses. It makes it so much easier to get through whatever situations you need those skills for. So, this test again is just like one potentially good way to highlight what your strengths and weaknesses are, so that you can surround yourself with the kinds of people who are going to help you with that. Though I will say it is interesting to me looking back through mine again and seeing the things that are supposed to be weaknesses. And I guess you mentioned that they're saying like at different points in your life this is probably true, but I'm looking at the weaknesses for mine and they're all just like basically being an asshole. And I don't think that's
I don't know. Arrogant, dismissive of emotions, overly critical, combative, socially clueless.
like,
I mean, I could see that maybe at some point in your life you were possibly that, but I feel like you've also done a lot of personal growth and development that you are definitely not like some of these weaknesses anymore. But
so that's what
that could have been your tendency maybe in the past, is what I would say.
So that's what's kind of interesting to me, is it's like, and I don't know, maybe that's, I guess I haven't gone too deep into this, but I would say that my set of weaknesses is far different than this now. But, personality is supposed to be something that's relatively stable. And I just don't see myself falling back into any of these things. Don't get me wrong. I used to do every single one of these things. All of this used to be true completely. But it's just interesting to me that those are things that have kind of like dissolved over time, because I would think if it's, or at least like, the way that most people think about personality is like, these are the things that are rooted into your being. So this is how you like are. And maybe what you said is a better characterization, which is like, those are the things I'm more naturally tended to do. But it's just interesting now because I just don't know. Like, even if I stopped working on myself, stopped like doing whatever else, I
don't think you'd
seems hard
to that.
that I would revert back into these things.
Well, I feel like after, like, it's like you don't undo the development that you've done, essentially. I feel like we're constantly evolving. Although I do remember you telling me, like, the one that stuck out was like combative, and I remember you telling me how you just used to pick fights for the fun of it. Like just to push people's buttons. And I was like, because that was a Donovan I've never met, but you've described some of the ways you used to be in the past, and I'm like, oh yeah, you've described yourself like this a little bit in the past.
No, I 100% like these things resonate with a past version of myself. I mainly just wanted to highlight that a lot of people see personality as like more static. And totally. Like these things aren't rooted in, because I don't really do any of these things anymore. I am still socially clueless. I don't think I'm ever gonna fix that. But the rest of these things are not things that I relate with at all anymore. So more than anything, I just want to highlight that, like, you can. I mean, I don't know. I guess I would say my personality changed, but like
Maybe.
a lot of people look at personality as static. So
Right. I am curious though, like, I mean, it might have been several years since you've done this test, unless you've done it recently, but I don't know, maybe if you did do it again, it might come out different, possibly. And maybe you have other weaknesses that you might resonate with more, potentially. I don't know.
yeah, well, that's also an interesting thing because I think the categories are supposed to be anchored, which is to say, like, they're not supposed to change that much.
Right.
And I guess it goes back to sort of the way that I actually think about personality independent of this test, which is like there are some certain things that we're predisposed to, but our predispositions don't determine our actions, which is to say that,
Yeah.
I might be more prone to anger than you are, but that doesn't mean I have to start hitting people. Like,
True. Yeah.
I may have to spend more time learning to manage anger than you do, but the actual actions aren't anchored at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's like partly, influence. I think the more emotionally developed a person becomes, then it's like they're not likely to do extreme things like hitting people or shooting people, kind of a thing. That I think that makes the difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I guess another part of it too is like there is your personality, and then there are also the way that traits change over time as you age, right? Because there are certain I don't think it's covered anywhere in this test, but like there are certain things that in general change as you age in terms of personality. I think people get a little more calm. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't want to speak completely out of turn because I don't really remember what the actual studies say are the changes in personality over time, but that's another thing that's interesting to me because like these tests don't account for
Right.
any of that
Aging.
stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like I was just thinking of just the changes of a dog. It's like when they're puppies, they're like bouncing off walls. And even now, my dogs are about 2.5 and they still have a ton of energy. But when I see a dog that's 10, it's like they slow down. They're different. They're not into like messing around as much. They're just more chill. But I think that's a natural progression of things. I'm curious though, since you said you didn't really resonate with the weaknesses, or I mean, you maybe resonated with that in the past. What about the strengths for your personality type? It says rational, informed, independent, determined, curious, original. Do you feel like resonating or connected with those currently or in the past or both?
I don't know. These categories are kind of hard for me. I might have to spend more time thinking about it than I want to spend on the podcast. But like,
Okay.
it goes in and out. If I look at something like determined, like there are times when I definitely feel that, and there are other times when I don't feel that at all. And so it's just like kind of one of those things that it's like, is this part of my personality or is this just something that happens somehow? Like, if I think about almost anyone in my life, I just thought of like 3 or 4 examples. This equally applies to them. I doubt they're INTJs. Like sometimes they're determined and sometimes they're not.
Right.
Same with like curious. I don't know what original means. It's hard for me to like, I mean, I know what the word means, but it's hard
Right.
for me to categorize like, am I being original? I don't know. I mean, I'm not intentionally trying to copy people.
That's true.
So anyway,
Yeah.
the I guess overall, it's like I'm more skeptical of these list of strengths than I have been in the past, which is to say that I like, yeah, sure they apply to me, but I'm thinking with a little bit more of a refined lens around like, does this actually like, okay, independent, like, do other people identify as dependent? I mean, I feel like that's more of like a self-esteem issue than a personality issue. So, looking a little more critically than I have in the past, because in the past I would have just been like, yeah, these all apply. Now I'm like more in the camp of sort of like the astrology lens where it's like, does this just apply to everyone? Because this doesn't seem that specific to me. But I'd be curious how you feel when you look at these words.
When I look at these words, I'm like, I wouldn't apply all of these to myself. I'm like rational and informed. I'm like, I don't think people would use those words to describe me. I mean, I'm rational, but I don't feel like I'm like the dreamer versus the rational. That's my husband is the rational one. So like on a spectrum, I'm like, I'm rational in that I'm not going to put my hand on a stove or step in front of a bus. but I'm yeah, I wouldn't use that word to describe me. I may be independent potentially, but I feel like I've evolved in that a little bit, that I'm, I used to not ask for help a lot, but now I'm like, I don't give a shit and will ask for help a little more. Determined, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think that's possibly part of my personality, but at the same time, similarly to you, there's moments where I'm just not. Like lately, I haven't been motivated. Sometimes there are moments where I've been like extremely determined, but curious. I'd say that's definitely a quality that I would connect with. And original, I don't know.
Yeah, right. That's I'm like, I don't really know what that means.
I'm not sure. But looking at my strengths, I was reading receptive, reliable, passionate, altruistic, and charismatic. And I resonate with all of those, but I'm like, do you resonate with all of my strengths?
Yeah, well, I went and pulled them up, and like it's sort of the same thing. Like I don't resonate with my own strengths any more than I do with these ones. Right? Like receptive, I feel like I've actually tried very hard to cultivate that. Reliable, like that's why we have this podcast, is because we both actually show up to do it.
Pretty reliable, yes.
Passionate, like I don't even know that that's different than determined, and maybe it feels different for other people, but to me, like those two things come together a lot. Like altruistic, like just I feel like it would be I don't know, strange to be like, no, I'm not altruistic.
No, I don't want to help people.
I don't want good things for people.
Change.
This is Happy Talks, and by that I mean it's only for me. No one else should be happy. Exactly. Charismatic, like, that's kind of like original in terms of like, I would like to think that I am, but I don't want to apply that to myself because that seems conceited. Like, and it's also not something that I have a good grasp on. Like, I don't know how if other people see me having charisma. I don't know if other people see me as original. Like, I don't know. And for those words, like that's what's important is the perception.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like a person's perception can vary. A person's perception of the same individual can vary person to person. Like I've been described as intense by some of my friends because it's like, I actually used to perceive myself as very laid back. But then I was like telling my friend that, and he was like, that is not you at all. I mean, you wouldn't have accomplished everything that you have if you were laid back. And I was like, that's a good point. Yeah. So he described me as intense, but there's other people that have described me as more laid back. So I guess it really depends on like the individual and maybe their own barometer of where they stand. Because like to a lot of people, maybe they consider me like introverted or shy because I don't always engage, or I'm depending on like the conversation. I feel like if it's like a small handful, I feel like there's people that like dominate the conversation, and I just kind of like, if I feel like putting the input, I don't feel like I generally don't unless I'm really engaged in it. But then there's other people that are way more extroverted. So it really depends on a lot of factors. It's all perception. It's all variable.
Yeah, I think the way that we just had the conversation and sort of like what we just opened up is the most useful way to use these kinds of things, right? Is to like go through and sort of talk about like different pieces and see things like what we were just looking at, where it's like, does your stuff apply to me? Oh yeah, it kind of does. And so it's like there's not like super rigid categories of like giant traits. There's not 4 letters that are like 16 squares that you can put people into that give you a strong understanding of the person. You might be able to get a couple of details, but
Yeah.
like it's not as
Yeah.
predictive as a lot of people make it out to be.
Right. Yeah. And it's like you gotta get to know the person, and yeah, using it as a self-reflective tool is really, I guess, the point we're trying to just drive in today.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a fun thing to do with friends or your partner, for the heck of it. And you can kind of resonate. I would say that I resonate more with my strengths compared, like I resonated with some of your strengths, but I feel like even the ones that I did resonate with, I resonate more with the ones listed under mine. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased, or maybe I just want to think that I'm like this.
Well, and it's also like I said, there is something, right?
Yeah.
They are measuring something. It's not
Yeah.
just like astrology signs, like
Right.
stuff that isn't really grounded in anything. Like there is something being measured, so it does make sense that there's a tighter fit to the categories that they actually like placed you in. I just want to make it like really clear because I've seen people use this way too rigidly.
Yeah.
And like I said, like for jobs and stuff. And like that's not a reliable application of this. It's not an effective use of this kind of tool. There's still too much like flexibility and ambiguity in sort of personality to use something like this so stringently.
Right. And I was thinking, if someone like made an applicant do this for a job interview, I'm like, wouldn't the applicant like try to like influence his results a little, and might not be totally accurate, and just maybe responding based on what he thinks the interviewer wants to hear. So I don't know. You got to think about that too. So anyways, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I hammered my points to death, and nobody needs to hear it again.
All right. Well, that's it for today. We appreciate you for tuning in this week. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, write in the comments what's your personality type, and if you agree that it's accurate or not so accurate, and help us spread happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.